Revenge films.
I had been married for a few years to my husband, Thomas. My husband was working at a pretty major company, and after a few years, he held a director role there. Before I got married, I was also working a lot and had a pretty successful career. When I was going to get married, I had a serious conversation with my husband about whether I was going to continue working or just marry into his family. When we had the conversation, my husband replied that he wanted to create a warm household, and that when he came home from work from a long day, he wanted me to welcome him home, so I became a full-time housewife. If I kept working, then we would have had more income, but if I just married into the family, then I could take care of my husband better. I was genuinely happy with either option, and so I decided to go along with my husband's wishes. Well, I thought that if things were to become financially difficult for us, then I could always go back to work if needed. But then, as soon as I became a full-time housewife, my mother-in-law who lived in the neighborhood became quite the painful person, and my husband and I were both troubled by her. In Thomas's family home, his father used to be living there with his mother, but then his father had an affair with a mistress in a different town, and he left his mother there alone. From there, Thomas's mother's affection towards Thomas exploded. For example, suddenly she would come over and barge into our house, and even though I'd be cooking in the kitchen, she would raise her voice and say, "Hey, what are you making there?" "What? I'm just getting dinner prepared, but—" "What even is this? It looks terrible. This cooking is no good. That's not suitable for my son's mouth. I know that my son likes the food that I cook way better anyway, so you need to feed him this." As she said that, she slammed a large pot on the kitchen counter that she had brought over from her house. When that happened, I tried to explain to my mother-in-law that I was already cooking a healthy meal for Thomas. But every single time I tried to explain that to her, she would go into hysterics. "If Thomas eats your cooking, he's going to become sick. That boy should be eating my cooking and my cooking only. So you just need to be serving my food to my son, do you understand? From now on, I'm going to be cooking all of Thomas's meals, so you don't need to get in the way anymore. Back off!" She was yelling at me at this point. Right at that time, Thomas came home from work. "Oh dear, welcome home. Thomas, here you go. Your mom made all of this food for you, so make sure you eat to your heart's content, okay? I'm going to come back tomorrow with dinner for you again, so I hope you're excited," she would say nonchalantly. When my husband heard that, he replied,
"How many times do I have to tell you? Sarah is making me delicious meals already every day. You really don't need to bring this much over."
He tries to defend me, but it only goes in one ear and out the other with his mother. "That's not okay. I am going to be cooking your food and bringing it over for you." She would insist on that and then leave the house. Of course, it wasn't every single day, but it was a frequent enough occurrence that the stress was piling up inside of me. Then one day, as usual, my mother-in-law brought over a full pot of food over to the house for Thomas. A couple of days later, she came to check how much of it was left. When she saw how much of it was left in the Tupperware, she was furious. "What is this? Thomas hasn't eaten any of it. I bet this is your doing. You're just not letting him eat it, are you?" And she was yelling at me in my kitchen. I did put it out for him to eat. However, there were other dishes prepared already, so I gave it to him like a side dish. My mother-in-law, for some reason, would always only bring over one dish. If it was a stew, she would bring over an entire pot full of stew. Or if it was rice, and she would bring over an entire pot full of that rice. Even if it was potato salad, the same way, she would bring an entire pot of potato salad. And there was no way that we would be able to finish all of that in one meal. However, none of the dishes that she brought were exactly main dishes for a meal. Of course, I was already cooking as well, and even if I was putting out my mother-in-law's cooking as a side dish, we would still be left over with too much. If anything, we were stuck left with so much of the same dish, and yet it would be too rude to throw it away, so I was storing it in the freezer. But even then, we were still left with multiple Tupperware of the same food. However, my mother-in-law would be livid that we hadn't finished the entire pot that she had brought over. "I told you already that you don't need to feed him any of your cooking." And then she would go into my fridge and started taking out all the leftovers from my cooking that I had stored or the food that I had prepped and threw it into the sink. She was just dumping them into the sink, and that made me snap. "Please, that's enough already! Don't you think it's a waste to be throwing away food like this?" "Shut up! Because you stole my son from me, even though Thomas is mine!" That was her response, so then I said with a serious face, "Sure, then you can have him back." When I said that, my mother-in-law froze on the spot. She was already in hysterics. "First of all, the only reason why my son stopped coming over to my house is because he got married to you." Well then, why don't you ask Thomas yourself? I've never once told him not to go back home to his family's house. So please, go ahead, ask Thomas how he feels yourself. When I said that, I managed to push her out of the house for the time being. And then, that evening, my husband and I went over to his parents' house. As soon as we walked in, Thomas was the first to speak.
I'm already an independent adult, so leave me alone! That's enough! And stop bringing over so much food at once like that! Obviously, there's no way we would be able to finish it! Then on top of that, I heard that you threw away my wife's cooking! What the hell is that? You don't need to come over anymore! And don't bring any of your cooking either!
Straight off, he started to lecture his mother. I was already feeling really stressed out about this, but it seemed that my husband was pretty furious about it himself, that it even shocked me. For a moment, I did feel a little bit bad for her, and when I looked over at his mother, she was shrinking in her chair. Well, you don't need to yell at her all of a sudden. I'm sure it's hard for your mother to be yelled at by her son. So come on, you can be a little bit nicer, right? As soon as I tried to defend her, my mother-in-law exploded. This is all your fault. You brainwashed him and you made him say all those things. This isn't my real son. I know that my real son is a lot nicer to me. He loves me. When he said that, I was at loss for words. My husband said that this conversation wasn't going anywhere, and he walked out and went straight back into the car. I also realized that any further discussions was pointless, so we went straight home. After that, my mother-in-law was only messaging Thomas, and so I was free of her harassment. However, are you sure you're eating properly? Have you caught a cold? That woman doesn't know what she's doing. That's why I'm worried to leave you with her. Please go back to the old you, Thomas. With love from your mom who thinks the world of you. Even during work hours, apparently she was sending all these messages, and Thomas was ignoring them. However, perhaps she thought that him ignoring her messages was also because of me, and she came back to my house and started yelling in front of the door. You don't have any right to get in between me and my son. Hurry up and get out of this house so that Thomas can go back to his real self. She was screaming, but I wanted to tell her that she's the one that needed to come back to reality. Even after Thomas yelled at her like that in her own house, she still didn't seem to understand. It almost made me respect how much she had created this alternate reality in her mind. She continued to yell outside, and because I didn't want to disturb the neighbors, I called the police on her. Not long after that, she was taken away in the police car. Thanks to that, it seemed that that incident made all of the neighbors think that something was wrong with my mother-in-law, and they started to come and check on me. Your mother-in-law, she seems like a handful. Are you being harassed by her? It must be difficult that your husband is a grown adult already and she can't let him go. And they started to comfort me. I got right on board with that and responded, yes, to tell you the truth, it's been really troubling me. Ever since my father-in-law left her, she suddenly became obsessed with Thomas again. My husband and I are really confused by her actions. I put on a sad face, and well, I was able to get sympathy from everybody. After she was taken away in the police car, apparently my mother-in-law was told by the police that if she was going to continue acting like this, eventually, she wouldn't be able to get away with just a warning, and she would actually be arrested and have to go to prison. That seemed to work because she didn't come near our house again after that. However, because we had both already blocked her, there was no way for her to contact us either. Of course, there was no way that Thomas nor I would go over to his mother's house unless absolutely necessary. And then there were talks at Thomas's company that he might be placed in charge of a new department in a different city. So we were planning on continuing to ignore her and then disappearing from the town without saying a word. While I feel sad for her that her own husband left her, that doesn't make it acceptable for her to treat her son like a romantic partner. It was really terrifying. When I thought that about what would happen if we had a child and that child looked like my husband, it sent chills down my spine. That's because I knew that while Thomas was ignoring her, she would definitely tell us to hand over the baby to her and start making comments about me as a mother. Both Thomas and I want to have kids eventually, but we also knew that once we have children, we wouldn't be able to go on dates together much, and even if we were to go on vacations, they would all be centered around the baby. So when we got married, we had decided together that for the first 3 years, we would spend that time just the two of us. And that's why during those first 3 years, we've been on vacation all kinds of places and made a lot of memories together. Recently, we were starting to discuss that maybe it might be time that we start trying for a baby. We said that we wanted to grow our family, and we were finally starting to seriously try to get pregnant. That was when Thomas's mother suddenly became obsessive with Thomas, and it was so unexpected that it scared us both. But now that we were both about to move to a different city and my mother-in-law wasn't going to be around, I had a feeling it was going to become a great fresh start for our family. I was sad to leave this town that I'd gotten accustomed to, but I'm much happier knowing that we won't be tied down by Thomas's mother's obsession with him anymore.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.